Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Unfortunately, my director, producer, and dear friend, Alex, will not be with us tonight. So I will try to manage on my own. So I'm trying to look here and be sure that I'm letting new people in as they come. And also talk coherently and think about what I'm going to say. The main focus in tonight's meeting, of course, is the events in Constantinople. And even though it's only 4 months, some rather important things occur, the most important of which, to me, has to do with the unveiling of the true power and personality or persona of Baha'u'llah as a manifestation. Because remember, until the declaration in the Garden of Rizwan, he was pretty much concealed insofar as his power, and not really, I mean, he was a leader throughout the period of Baghdad. But once he reveals his station, remember, just symbolically, he rides this beautiful stallion instead of a donkey. He wore a new headdress. And among other things, on the journey from Baghdad to Samsun and to Constantinople, he is careful to caution the believers and companions not to accept gifts and so forth. This is a very important theme throughout the ministry of Baha'u'llah. And of course, it applies to those of you who are not Baha'is, to all Baha'is, in the sense that no one can contribute money to the Baha'i faith except Baha'is. And and no one can know how much anyone contributes. This is a very important distinction, because it means that every building that is built by the Baha'i faith is built by Baha'is, and it totally precludes or prevents anyone from claiming to have or trying to have some leverage over what decisions are made by the Baha'i community or by the Baha'i administrative order. So it is totally autonomous and independent, as was Baha'u'llah. Now, the second thing, and the most important thing that I think occurs in the stay in Constantinople, in addition to his letter to the Sultan, Abdu'l-Azíz, is that he unveils this new demeanor, if you will, that he will kowtow to no one, he will ask favors of no one, he will accede to no one's request other than what he, as manifestation, thinks is appropriate for him to do. So let me begin with the sharing of my screen and the beginning of Baha'u'llah's 4 remarkable months in Constantinople. And they're remarkable for about 5 different reasons that I'm going to share with you. The actions he takes after his arrival or upon his arrival, which are totally unexpected by those who have invited. Remember, he is, and he says in his communication with him, that he is coming as a guest, and that and therefore he will not beseech the Sultan or anyone else for any favors. But of course, he's not really a guest, and he knows that. He is really being taken away from influence near Persia and near Baghdad, which is close to Persia. Secondly, his letter to the Sultan and the Sultan's reaction to it, and its relation to the tablet that he reveals later called the Suriy-i-Muluk, which is in English now, in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts. his bold and powerful, that should be and powerful words to the Persian minister in Constantinople about how the Persian government has treated the Babis and now the Baha'is. The reason Baha'u'llah agrees to depart, now that may not sound familiar to you, but the fact is, it is his decision, he says, to stay in violation of the mandate that he leave and suffer martyrdom if that's what they want to do. But for reasons that we'll describe, he agrees to depart and go to Adrianople. And then very end of our discussion tonight, we'll get a little glimpse of why the journey to Adrianople was so arduous. Of course, he'd just gotten through going through 110 days of a journey, which was not easy, but at least they had supplies they needed, the clothes they needed, and so on. Not so with the journey to Adrianople. So let's begin with the importance of Constantinople itself. It is called the Great City in the Baha'i writings, and not just in the Baha'i writings, but this was its title. It was named after the Emperor Constantine, whom I'm sure you remember either from my classes or just your own common knowledge, that he, in addition to devising the Council of Nicaea in order to consolidate the different factions of Christianity, so he could make it the religion of the Roman Empire and therefore consolidate the Roman Empire. So first he had to consolidate Christianity, and then he had to consolidate the Roman Empire, which was under a great deal of tribulation, because only about 100 years later, it would be totally overwhelmed by the invasion of the Goths, the Visigoths, and so on, the various Germanic tribes. And so it's named the city of Constantinople. Then in the Battle of Adrianople in 378, and Adrianople takes its name from the Emperor Hadrian. And those of you who know anything about English literature know that there's a wall that's the remnants of which remains, that the Romans, when they invaded Britain, they built a wall in the northern part of, well, the lower part of Northumbria to keep out the invading Picts, which were tribes that became later the Picts, and the Scots were Celtic peoples, and that was called Hadrian's Wall. So you have the invasion of these Germanic tribes, and they take over at the Battle of Adrianople, and you have the beginning of what's called the Dark Ages, though we are discovering and have discovered for some time that it was dark only because we really didn't know much about it. Turns out these tribes were very smart, had incredible access to our interest in the arts and literature, even though it was oral tradition. Still, the literature is very much studied today. Then you have the Byzantine Empire from 395 to 1453, which was a Christian empire and withstood the onslaught of the Islamic Empire, but the Ottoman Empire in 1453 conquered Byzantium, and from 1453 until 1922, the Ottoman Empire was in charge of Constantinople, and then in 1922 it became Istanbul, and the Ottoman Empire was, of course, replaced by other institutions. So, as I said, the major point I'm trying to get across in this talk about why I think this stay of 4 months is so remarkable is that his both public and private persona become demonstrably changed from what he had demonstrated before. So it's he becomes, if you will, a person of power and authority who articulates that power without any reticence, without any, I wouldn't say without humility. He is humble before God always, but as God's spokesman on earth, he speaks in that vein and is not hesitant to say what his station is and why his advice should be followed. This is quite distinct from what we have seen of Baha'u'llah before, who largely avoided giving any advice to people in government and so on. He was obedient and so on. But now he has openly declared himself, well, he declared himself to his fellow believers in Rizwan and Baghdad, and now he is going to let the whole world become apprised of his station and of this new revelation. This is what Constantinople looked like in the time of Baha'u'llah. This is an actual photograph taken in the 1890s. So this is 2 years before Baha'u'llah deceased. It's colorized, obviously. Here's another view of that same bridge in Constantinople. Now, of course, Constantinople is in a strategic place between Turkey and Europe, and you have the, well, we'll see a map of it later. One of the most celebrated places in Constantinople is the Mosque of the Sophia Hagia, though it was originally built as a cathedral, the largest one in the world, using, though it doesn't look like a cathedral, because you usually think of Romanesque architecture of like Notre Dame, which is Gothic architecture or Romanesque Gothic architecture. This is Byzantine architecture, but the minarets you see here were built later. So it was the center of the Eastern Orthodox Church for nearly 1,000 years. And then, of course, with the invasion of the Ottoman Turks, it was converted into a mosque. And that's when the minarets here were built. And the view of it here shows the beautiful gardens that still occupy this incredible edifice. This is a picture that I showed you last time, and its importance will become clear later, but the particular importance, this picture was taken in Constantinople, and the main figures that we are most familiar with, of course, are Baha'u'llah's full brother, Mirza Musa, also his real name is Aki Kalim. Mirza Musa means Moses, and was faithful and dutiful throughout his life. And this is Nabil the historian. Much of the Guardian's description of the history of this time and of that of Hassan Balyuzi's work, Baha'u'llah, the King of Glory, come from the notes and history taken by Nabil and others who told, in other words, when people had a narrative of some incident they wanted recorded, they would tell Nabil and he would record it. We'll see some of that later, particularly next week when we see the attempts on the life of Baha'u'llah by Mirza Yahya and his minions. This is the real focus of this picture for me, because it's the only picture I'm aware of the person who is called the Antichrist of the Baha'i faith. And what does that mean? Well, Antichrist means the one who attempts, the central figure who is the enemy of and results in the downfall of, or the attempt to create the downfall of the religion. If you remember the Baha'i faith, the Antichrist is the Grand Vizier of Muhammad Shah, who continues to be the Vizier under the reign of Nasir din Shah. And he is largely responsible, if you remember, for the Bab not being able to meet with the Shah because he was afraid or feared, and it had, with justification, the Shah might believe the Bab and convert. And so he was responsible not only for the imprisonment of the Bab, but the persecution of the Babis. So, so this, to me, is a very important figure, and because he becomes, as I presume most of you know, he becomes the one who instigates or stokes the fires of greed and aspirations of Mirza Yahya. So the expectations of one who came to Constantinople, someone of note, would be that they would pay respects to the Sultan, who is, or was, if you will, not only head of the Ottoman Empire, but also as such was head of the Sunni sect of Islam, which was by far and still is the dominant sect of Islam. They were expected to bestow gifts in token of their respect to the Sultan. They were expected to request favors, and this was particularly true of the Persian princes, and there were many of them, because remember that the the Shahs had many wives and therefore many children and therefore many princes, and they would request favors from the Sultan. And they would show complete humility before him and obeisance towards him. But Baha'u'llah would have none of that. And this is from Bahá'u'lláh, though he's quoting in some places from The Guardian. Actually, the only places he, Baha'u'llah, visited in Istanbul were public baths and mosques. Many came to visit him and pay their respects, but he never went to anyone's house except his brothers, and that would be Mirza Musa. His visitors, men in high places, told him it was customary for a distinguished person visiting the capital to call on the foreign minister after 3 days, through him meet the Grand Vizier, and through the Grand Vizier to ask to be received by the Sultan. They advised him to do likewise. He countered their advice by saying that he had no design or project to further, no favor to solicit and gain. He had come to Istanbul by the invitation of the Ottoman government and for no other reason. Therefore, let them seek him if they had anything to convey to him. Now, again, this, you would say, well, this borders on rudeness. No, this is a point where he establishes who and what he is, and he never changes from this stance henceforward. So the power that emanates from him is not only through his pen, but his personality and his actions and reactions. So that's why this is such an important 4 months, because this is where he establishes who he is and what he will put up with and what he will not put up with. During his 4-month sojourn in the city of Constantinople the Great, Baha'u'llah, in addition to the tablet of Subhanika Yahu, revealed the Loy Abdu'l-Azíz Vakullah, a tablet addressed to the Sultan. Now, we don't have this tablet. It was lost or it was destroyed, but we know what was in it, and I'll show you how. A tablet addressed to the Sultan. It was revealed on the very day that the brother-in-law of the Grand Vizier came to inform Baha'u'llah of the edict which had been issued against him. Refusing to meet the envoy, Baha'u'llah delegated Abdul-Baha and Aqi Kalim, Mirza Musa, to receive it and promptly to reply, and promised to reply within 3 days. Next morning, the tablet was delivered by Shamsi Beg directly to Ali Pasha, with a message from its author that it was sent down from God. So again, he's not dilly-dallying around. I don't know what would be a more sophisticated term, but he's not beating around the bush about who he is and what he will and will not accept as God's vicegerent on earth. So why does he respond to this matter? Well, in the Siachal, if you remember, he had rejected the attempt of the Russian ambassador to assist him, though the Russian ambassador was strategically important in getting him released, but he did not accept the invitation to go to Russia. But he, at the same time, does not write a letter to stating who he is or anything like that, because he hasn't revealed who he is yet, even though in the Siachal, the first intimations of his station and ministry are made known to him. The journey from Baghdad to Samsun, again, we see the change that I've just mentioned, the different headdress, riding on the stallion, ordering the companions how they should behave, and directing the entire enterprise. In Constantinople, then, he assumes the totality of this new persona. In Adrianople, it becomes even more emphatic, though there's a whole lot more. Adrianople is really worthy of a very exciting novel, and that's what we're going to have 2 weeks from tonight, is the story of Adrianople. It's very exciting storyline, and we'll go through the total of it. And then finally in Akka, where, if you remember, well, there's some things you will that we've talked about before, but we'll get to it later. Suffice it to say, he does the same thing by disdaining to plead for anything. There are a number of things when we get there that I'll explain to you, but remember that when Abdu'l-Baha says, well, why don't you leave the city walls and go to the country you love so dearly? He says, because I'm a prisoner. And so Abdu'l-Baha, if you have heard this story, beseeches the governor of Akka to plead with Baha'u'llah to leave, that he can leave. But he in other words, he wants to, this is another thing, and I've mentioned it before, he wants the things that happen to happen because of forces outside of his control, in the sense that, yes, he could have avoided being exiled to Baghdad by going to Russia. But the point is, by allowing the forces that be to be in charge of what happens to the course of his life, rather than fighting them or trying to do what Mirza Yahya does, you know, to hide or disguise himself or something. He fulfills all sorts of prophecies from the Old Testament, from the New Testament, from the Quran and from Hadith and so on, because he, in other words, no way did he contrive to end up in Akka, yet by ending up in Akka, he fulfills these prophecies that the manifestation would appear in Akka. So I think you get my point. I hope you do. We'll discuss it more later. So what did the effects of this letter have? We don't know what the letter is, but there's this lovely and important statement that is cited both in Baal-Yuzi and in God Passes By. I know not what the letter contained, Shamsi Beg subsequently informed Aikia Kalim. Let me have a sip of tea so I can speak more clearly. For no sooner had the Grand Vizier perused it than he turned the color of a corpse and remarked, "It is as if the King of Kings were issuing his behest to his humblest vassal king and regulating his conduct. So grievous was his condition that I backed out of his presence. Whatever action," Baha'u'llah commenting on the fact. Now this is incredible. This is Baha'u'llah speaking afterward. And listen to it carefully. Whatever action Baha'u'llah, commenting on the effect of that tablet had produced, is reported to have stated, "The ministers of the Sultan took against us, after having become acquainted with its contents, cannot be regarded as unjustifiable. The acts they committed before its perusal, however, can have no justification." So in other words, they had already decided through the edict to remove him. So that's not justified. But he says, whatever they do to us afterward is justified, cannot be regarded as unjustifiable. And here he's talking about if they kill us, if they martyr us, I can appreciate why they would do that. In other words, the letter must have been incredibly, well, as we know, it's very much like the Suriy-i-Muluk, and we'll see why. This is from the Suriy-i-Muluk, which, as I say, you have access to on the summons of the Lord of Hosts, which contains the Suriy-i-Haykal and several other tablets, but it contains this one in particular. And Baal-Yuzi in Baha'u'llah, the King of Glory, quotes the entire part of that tablet that speaks directly to Abdu'l-Azíz. So this is to Abdu'l-Azíz within a tablet revealed later in Adrianople. "Hearken, O king, to the speech of him that speaketh the truth, him that doth not ask thee to recompense him with the things God hath chosen to bestow upon thee, him who unerringly treadeth the straight path. He it is who summoneth thee unto God thy Lord, who showeth thee the right course, the way that leadeth to true felicity, that haply thou mayest be of them with whom it shall be well." And then more from the same tablet. "Wert thou to incline thine ear unto my speech and observe my counsel, God would exalt thee to so eminent a position that the designs of no man on the whole earth could ever touch or hurt thee. Seize thou and hold firmly within the grasp of thy might the reins of the affairs of thy people, and examine in person whatever pertaineth unto them. Let nothing escape thee, for therein lieth the highest good." Now, this is very much like something we'll discuss much later in the Suriy-i-Haykal, though that is the final version of the Suriy-i-Haykal, which includes the letter to the Pope, Queen Victoria, Napoleon III, and to Nasir ad-Din Shah, where he says, you know, to the Queen, who treated him with not with disdain, but saying, "If it be of God, it will endure." He says, you know, if you went further and accepted this faith, you would be heralded through history like no monarch has ever been heralded in the world. And of course, Queen Marie of Romania was the first monarch to recognize and become a Baha'u'llah and become a Baha'i. And you see with what esteem she is held today and will be held through history, even increasingly so as the faith spreads and becomes more dominant. So he's saying the same thing to Abdu'l-Azíz. You are head of this incredible, you know, the vast portion of Islam. If you were to accept this and listen to what I'm saying, you would have more power and more prestige than you can possibly imagine, and greater than anything that you could have in the way of the things of this world. And so here's the end of that. "Render thanks unto God for having chosen thee out of the whole world and made thee king over them that profess thy faith," the Sunni sect of Islam. "Thou canst best praise him if thou lovest his loved ones and dost safeguard and protect his servants from the mischief of the treacherous, that none may any longer oppress them." It's amazing. And excuse me, there is more. "In the daytime and in the night season, and even at morn, we pray to God on thy behalf." So I say he's not humble, but he is kind. And that's true with all the letters he sends to every leader. Sometimes he chastises them for the evil they have done, but he assures them of the possibility of forgiveness and grace, and that he prays for them and that God will forgive them for any of their sins should they request that forgiveness. That he may graciously aid thee to be obedient unto him and to observe his commandment, that he may shield thee from the host of the evil ones. Do therefore as it pleaseth thee, and treat us as befitteth thy station and beseemeth thy sovereignty. Be not forgetful of the law of God in whatever thou desirest to achieve, now or in the days to come. Say, praise be to God, the Lord of all worlds. Now, there's more to that. If you look in Bahá'u'lláh, you can read the rest of it, that portion of the Suriy-i-Muluk that's addressed to Abdu'l-Azíz. In particular, he says, he cautions him about listening to or taking advice from his ministers or his advisors to be sure they're trustworthy. And of course, his advisors now are telling him to get rid of Baha'u'llah, and that's part of what he's talking about. And this is a quote from Bahá'u'lláh. But Sultan Abdu'l-Azíz failed to respond to the twice repeated call of Baha'u'llah and brought doom and destruction upon himself. Now, twice repeated, meaning it was first in the tablet he sent to him, and then secondly in the Suriy-i-Muluk, where he addresses him. So that's the two addresses. Then the Grand Vizier that received it is Ali Pasha. And so the individual who turned the color of the corpse and had such a devastating, it looks like he's still in shock in this picture. That's who that is. And then very worthwhile reading are the words that Baha'u'llah wrote to the Persian minister in Constantinople later on. This is that individual who later became the Grand Vizier to Nasir-ad-Din Shah. But at the time, he was, as you can see at the bottom, the Persian minister in Istanbul. And on the eve of his departure, which followed almost immediately upon the promulgation of the edict of his banishment, when in a last and memorable interview with the aforementioned Haji Mirza Hassani Safa, he sent the following message to the Persian ambassador. A little more tea. What did it profit thee, and such as are like thee, to slay year after year so many of the oppressed, and to afflict upon them manifold afflictions, when they have increased 100-fold? And ye find yourselves in complete bewilderment, not knowing how to relieve your minds of this oppressive thought. His cause transcends any and every plan ye devise. Know this much: were all the governments on earth to unite and take my life and the lives of all who bear this name, this divine fire would never be quenched. His call will rather encompass all the kings of the earth, nay, all that hath been created from water and clay. Whatever may yet befall us, great shall be our gain, and manifest the loss wherewith they shall be afflicted. Now that's, you get the sense, I think, now when you hear that or read that, of what I'm talking about, of this change in, it's not a change, it's the unveiling of his station that he has kept secluded all this time. For even though for the 10 years after the Siachal, he directed the cause of the Bab, he withheld or was his own station, and both his words and his deeds. So for example, the major work he wrote, the Kitab-i-Igan, is a defense of the Bab and the Babi faith. Even though at the very end he alludes to himself, he doesn't identify Mastighath as him who is invoked as himself. Now, this sort of brings us to the end, or at least before the painful or dire journey to Adrianople. This is a description, and Bahá'u'lláh is a wonderful writer. He was a hand of the cause, and he was a wonderful historian. wrote many books on the history of the faith. So once the edict has been issued, Baha'u'llah says, in effect, he's going to stay. If they want to kill us, so be it. They won't gain anything thereby. But then Mirza Yahya, poltroon, had a wonderful word, as he always was, together with a few others of his kind, began to waver and show signs of alarm and perplexity. They made Mirza Yahya their spokesman to go to Baha'u'llah and entreat him to accept this banishment. Their plea was, we have our wives and our children with us, and they will perish too. Baha'u'llah assured them to offer all that one has in the path of God is an act of highest merit. And as to the wives and children, he said they could be sent to the houses of the foreign envoys who would look after them. Baha'u'llah, perceiving the possibility of a rift in the ranks of the Babis, which would have been damaging to the cause of God, reluctantly agreed to leave Istanbul. Now, this is something I did not know before, that again, the same reason, if you remember, the only reason he left to go for 2 years to the mountains of Suleymaniye, to Kurdistan, and he says this later, was because he was causing a rift because Mirza Yahya, as nominee of the Bab, was claiming that Baha'u'llah was trying to usurp his power. And so he left in order to let things settle down. And so the same thing here, that this his reasoning for agreeing to be banished, rather than saying, I'm not going to go, do with me what you will, he says, okay, if I don't go, then we're going to have division and you may think, well, Mirza Yahya only had a handful of followers. No, it's not quite that simple. And that's something we'll see 2 weeks from tonight when we discuss the plot lines of the incredible story of what happens in Adrianople. So here we come to the end of our presentation, though it's very interesting in the journey to Adrianople. Now, what's so interesting about it? It's 12 days journey and they're there. Well, the problem is, and I checked this 2 hours ago, an hour and a half ago, the temperature right now in Erdene, which is Adrianople, is 26 degrees Fahrenheit. But, and this is a quote, this was the coldest winter in over 40 years, so it was probably colder than that. So in below freezing weather, they leave, but without proper clothing, and all of their belongings are simply tossed into wagons, and they're made to travel 149 miles. And that's why it takes them 12 days. And so they start out here from Istanbul, they stop. Now, this is the highway road, because this is on Google Maps. They took this road going here to Bukachamechi, to Silveri, which was called Silvara at the time. So they're going this lower road here near the Sea of Marmara. And another place that's mentioned is Babasek or Babieske. Eski it is. They stopped 4 places. One of them is not mentioned here. And you'll see here, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, it's not there. It's, where is it? Here. They stop at these, and I'm not going to try to pronounce these. I'll do them damage, I'm sure, but Kuchik, Chakimachi, Chihi, I'm not going to try to pronounce, Salvare, Berkas, and Babaeski. And Babaeski is right here. You can see that on the map. If I get it right there, Babaeski, that's the last one. And then so 4 stages in the journey. Now, the description of it is very compelling. Pursuant to the preemptory orders issued for the immediate departure of the already twice banished exiles, Baha'u'llah, his family, and his companions, some riding in wagons, other mounted on pack animals, with their belongings piled in carts drawn by oxen, set out accompanied by Turkish officers on a cold December morning amidst the weeping of the friends they were leaving behind, on their 12-day journey across a bleak and windswept country to a city characterized by Baha'u'llah as the place which none entereth except such as have rebelled against the authority of the sovereign. So it's sort of like a prison city, I guess, but in other words, at the time, even though it has once been a noble place, it was a place where they were sent to be remote from the Ottoman Empire. It was on the outskirts of the Ottoman Empire. And of course, it's in now what is Europe. And it's furthermore, the furthest, it's the only manifestation in recorded history who was in Europe, who was in the Europe landmass. They expelled us, is his own testimony in Suriy-i-Muluk, from the city of Constantinople with an abasement with which no abasement on earth can compare. Neither my family nor those who accompanied me, he further states, had the necessary raiment to protect them from the cold in that freezing weather. And again, the eyes of our enemies wept over us, and beyond them those of every discerning person. A banishment, laments Nabil, endured with such meekness that the pen sheddeth tears when recounting it, and the page is ashamed to bear its description in that beautiful imagery. A cold of such intensity, that same chronicler records, and that chronicler again is Nabil, prevailed that year, that nonagenarians, that would be people in their 90s, could not recall its like. In some regions, in both Turkey and Persia, animals succumbed to its severity and perished in the snows. The upper reaches of the Euphrates in Manda Nukri were covered with ice for several days, an unprecedented phenomenon, while in Diyarbakir, the river froze over for no less than 40 days. To obtain water from the springs, one of the exiles of Adrianople recounts, a great fire had to be lighted in their immediate neighborhood and kept burning for a couple of hours before they thawed out. Traveling through rain and storm, at times even making night marches, the weary travelers, after brief halts, and I'm not going to try to pronounce those 4 places, arrived at their destination on the 1st of Rajab 1280, or December 12th, 1863, and were lodged in the Khani Arab, a 2-story caravanserai near the house of Izzat Agha. 3 days later, Baha'u'llah and his family were consigned to a house suitable only for summer habitation in the Muradiyeh quarter near Taqiyya Maulavi, and were moved again after a week to another house in the vicinity of a mosque in that same neighborhood. Next week, we'll see that mosque and that house, and we will discuss, as I said, what is an incredible plot. And then in the meetings after that, we'll get to the strategic events that occur insofar as the growth and development of the faith is concerned that happens in Adrianople, in particular the tablets that are revealed.